When Aunt Mara died, the lawyer slid a single brass key across his desk like it weighed more than her entire estate. The key was for the Blue Door, our shoebox café 2 streets from the train tracks, the place where she taught me to crack eggs with one hand and say people's names like a welcome. The will was less simple, equal ownership with my cousin Joel, a clause about stewardship over profit, and a letter sealed in Mara's looping handwriting that I couldn't bring myself to open in front of anyone. I walked to the Blue Door at dusk, unlocked the stubborn blue paint, and let the smell of coffee, cinnamon, and old conversations spill out. The chalkboard still had Mara's last specials: lemon slice with too much zest, tomato soup that tasted like warm late afternoons. Joel arrived late, shoulders forward like an apology he didn't know how to deliver. "We should flip it," he said. "Sell to a developer. Split the money." I looked at the framed photo of Mara laughing into her apron. "We're not doing that," I said. The first week was a scramble. Orders too hot, milk steamed too cold, my hands remembering the choreography only when the line of commuters forced them to. Joel hovered, counting till drawers, talking about margins like he built them himself. At closing, a courier handed me an envelope from the city. I tore it open under the humming light. It wasn't a condolence card. It was a notice I didn't understand until the numbers jumped. A lien. A debt I hadn't known existed. It felt like the floor tilted, and the key in my pocket grew heavier. I met the landlord, Mr. Verma, in his office that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coins. He tapped the letter with 2 knuckles. "Your aunt deferred rent during lockdowns. We agreed she'd catch up when she could." He looked almost apologetic. "She tried. Then she got sick. The amount could have bought a decent car." I asked for time. He offered a plan that required more customers than we had shares. On my way out, Joel texted 15 words about opportunity costs, and one about business maturity. I wanted to throw my phone into the river and then ask it to forgive me. Back at the cafe, Joel introduced me to Blythe, a girl with a neon manicure and a ring light in her tote. "We're going to rebrand," she trilled, as if the Blue Door were a tired friend she could fix with new eyebrows. I stared at the walls we'd painted ourselves, the chalk smudges that looked like fog. "We're going to remember why people come here," I said. Blythe filmed me wiping a table and posted it with the caption, "New manager, new era." I didn't feel new. I felt like a jar somebody had finally opened. At 3 p.m., a man with a clipboard appeared, announcing himself as a health inspector responding to an anonymous complaint. He checked fridge temperatures, peered at seals, lifted cutting boards like playing cards. My heart kept time with his pen. He found a cracked tile near the sink and a thermometer out of calibration. Nothing critical, everything fixable, but his tone had the gravity of a judge. He signed the form, left a copy, and said, "Someone's watching." I knew who. I wiped the tile with a cloth as if I could polish away the feeling of being sabotaged. Drama has a smell. It's sharp, metallic, like a storm has licked the spoons. The next morning a video of me appeared on Blythe's account, me telling a belligerent customer we'd cut him off after his 3rd double espresso and 4th insult. She posted it with a caption about hostile vibes and gatekeeping caffeine, and the clip made its way across the city like a rumor with good shoes. It didn't show him slamming his cup, or me steadying a toddler's juice box while his mother blinked back tears. It did show my face plain and tired. The comments divided us into heroes and villains by noon. By closing I had 3 one-star reviews and 1 message offering to consult on my brand tone. I wanted to answer each stranger with a cinnamon roll and a seat at the small table by the window. Instead I turned off my phone and scrubbed the milk wand like it owed me honesty. When the last customer left, I locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and finally opened Mara's sealed letter. Her handwriting walked across the page. "Keep the door blue. People come when they know what color welcome is." She wrote about Joel with care that surprised me. "He is not cruel, he is frightened," she said, as if fear were a flavor you could balance with acid. She wrote about how business is just a word for a promise you keep in public. At the end, "If you have to fight, fight fair. No one wins with scorched earth. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and leaned my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the street held its breath. Inside, the espresso machine popped like a small fire, and I couldn't tell if it was warning me or cheering. I posted one thing the next morning, a photo of the letter's final line, the edge of Mara's looping M softened by time. The caption said, "We'll be here with your names on our lips and cinnamon under our nails." The comments shifted by degrees, like a tide that changes minds slowly. People showed up even if they didn't need coffee. They came to touch the counter where Mara had laughed. A tired man in a tie-dye jacket said, "I used to come here after night shift. Your aunt would add an extra sugar without making a thing of it." I did the same, and he nodded like we'd signed a treaty. Joel confronted me in the back, voice pitched to the frequency of a closed door. "You're letting sentiment bankrupt us," he said. "You're letting algorithms tell you who you are," I said back. We stared at each other over a tub of scones. For a second we were kids again, arguing over the last feijoa, ignoring Mara's rule, share the sweet or nobody eats. "Investors want results," he said. "People want to matter," I said. Neither of us was wrong, both of us were infuriating. At lunch, a group of high schoolers camped out with calculus, watched my hands, and asked if I could turn the music up 2 clicks. I did, and the room loosened. At 3, a courier delivered a thick envelope stamped urgent from a law firm I didn't know. Injunction. Joel was filing for managerial control, citing operational instability. The paper felt colder than the counter. I remembered the line in Mara's letter about fighting fair. I didn't feel fair. I felt cornered, and the only thing I knew to do when cornered was to make soup. Law offices keep time differently. The clock behind my lawyer, a woman named Corinne who dressed like she was allergic to panic, ticked with authority rather than speed. She scanned the injunction, her pen marking quiet constellations in the margins. "He's arguing that you're harming the asset," she said, and the word asset made the café feel like a brick instead of a room with light that loved people's faces. "We'll respond with evidence," she said. "Numbers. Also testimonies." I thought of the men in tie-dye jackets, the kids with calculus, a mother whose toddler had asked if the blue door lady could come to his birthday. Outside, it rained in the soft, convincingly cinematic way that makes you think the city is promising something. I messaged Tash, my sister, who lives in a city that speaks faster than ours. She called back immediately. "I'll fly down," she said, not because she had time, but because she had loyalty. I told her not to. She booked the ticket anyway. "I'm not coming for him," she said. "I'm coming for you. And for Mara, who baked through earthquakes." Back at the cafe, a woman waited by the pastry case, her hair braided like a crown she'd forgotten she deserved. "Ava." We hadn't spoken in a year. "I saw the video," she said. "It looked like you were carrying something heavy alone." The air rearranged itself around us, and the noise of the espresso machine seemed to back away respectfully. "I am," I said. "It's too heavy to carry together again," she said kindly, answering the question I hadn't asked. We stood there, not missing each other anymore but honoring what we'd tried to build. She took a slice of lemon cake, too much zest, the way she liked it, and left a note under the tip jar, "Keep the door blue." Court was a beige room with a polite microphone, and a judge who had the face of someone born tired and noble. Joel wore a suit that fit like he had borrowed confidence from a tailor. Blythe sat behind him, phone turned off for once, eyes scanning for angles. Corinne spoke in paragraphs that held their shape. She showed the judge ledgers with lines that sloped upward in small, stubborn ways. She showed letters from customers who wrote about finding their way back to mornings. She showed the photo of Mara's line about fighting fair and did not cry. I did. Joel's lawyer talked about brand risk, about negative virality, about uncertainty around an owner who engages emotionally with stakeholders. The judge's eyebrow considered this like a math problem. Corinne asked for a mediated arrangement instead of full control, joint sign-off on major expenses, third-party bookkeeping, a calendar of responsibilities divided by things we didn't hate. The judge looked at both of us as if we were two kids squabbling over a very earnest sandcastle. "You're not enemies," he said softly. "You're related." He granted the mediation. Score 1 for civility, 0 for victory laps. Outside, we stood under the same awning, pretending not to share the same rain. "We can make this work," I said, feeling ridiculous, like suggesting we build a boat out of receipts. "We can make money," he said, and for a second those sentences kissed. Then he looked at his phone, face blanching. "Verma's raising rent," he said. I checked my email. New notice. New numbers. The rain stopped being cinematic and became merely wet. We walked back to the café separately, together, rehearsing our next argument without writing the ending. We called a meeting at the Blue Door. People came with pens and opinions and patience, 3 things you can build almost anything from. Mr. Verma sat in the corner with a ledger and a sigh. "The building's insurance went up," he said. "I can't pay that with goodwill." Tash had landed and taken over a section of wall with sticky notes that looked like birds. She proposed a tiered plan, small rent increase now, more later if we hit targets, with a clause about crisis relief. Joel surprised me by saying, "We can add a community night surcharge, 50 cents per drink that funds bills in quiet months." We argued not about whether to do it, but about how to do it without making anyone feel like charity. A high schooler suggested a punch card that read, "You're keeping the lights on," with the last punch free. A paramedic suggested we offer first responders a free long black between midnight and 4 a.m., which made the room hum. Varma rubbed his forehead and said the number that would make him stop losing sleep. We drew lines from hope to budget and watched them intersect with reality like a decent map. Before we could announce anything, the lights flickered and died. The room inhaled as one. I found the rechargeable lantern under the counter, thank God, and snapped it on. The cafe turned into a ship's cabin, faces lit from below, eyes bright. Someone started humming. We kept serving coffee by lantern glow, cash only, milk warmed by a camping stove a neighbor fetched in 5 minutes flat. The storm outside gathered itself for another attempt. Inside, the room decided to keep going. I watched Joel hand a stranger a cup with both hands like it mattered. For the first time that week, I thought we might deserve each other. The power returned with a clunk and a cheer that sounded like relief learning to sing. We reopened with a soft launch of our new plan, the 50-cent. Lights on. Line item, the punch cards, the midnight-long blacks for night crews who keep a city from coming apart quietly. People accepted it like they'd been waiting to be asked. Joel created a neat spreadsheet. I created a blackboard with chalk stars. We met in the middle at a laminated sign that didn't scream and a till report that didn't cry. 2 days later, we planned a weekend. Open again morning. A small festival of bread, music, and unshowy bravery. Hammy from the high school offered to busk on guitar. A teacher promised to bring students to read tiny poems about coffee and resilience. Ava emailed a recipe for a rosemary shortbread that broke gently in the hand. I tested it 3 times, the kitchen filling with a smell I wanted to live in. Tash added a quiet donation jar for the rent cushion, no guilt, just a note. Leave what you can, take what you need, either way, have a biscuit. The morning arrived like a slightly nervous guest. We had a line by 9. I moved like a song I knew. Then, in the middle of the rush, a woman bit into a lemon muffin and made a face like betrayal. Another did the same with a cappuccino. My tongue caught it second later, the sugar was salt. Every sweet thing had turned to ocean. Someone had swapped our labeled tubs. Not an accident. A choice. I looked toward the back, where the dry goods live, and felt my own face harden. The room paused, hanging between disaster and possibility. We pivoted. "We're launching Savory Morning," I announced, voice steady because it had to be. "Try the salted lemon muffin with cream cheese. Pretend we meant it." Laughter loosened the room's shoulders. We comped coffees, switched to flat whites, added honey at the table. Tash buttered muffins and whispered, "Call them coastal cakes." We did. People posted photos with captions that didn't hurt. A chef from 3 doors down ran over with herbs and a wink. We invented a toast eye on the spot. Rosemary shortbread crumbled over hot tomatoes and cheese. A crime turned into a new religion. After the rush, I checked the security footage. A figure in a hoodie had walked into the kitchen at dawn, calm as rain. Not Joel, too broad in the shoulders. Blythe? The height matched, the walk matched, the petty matched. I confronted Joel before my blood could cool. He stared at the grainy still, then sank onto a crate like a puppet whose strings had surrendered. "I'll talk to her," he said quietly. "No," I said. "I will." He stopped me with a look I recognized from childhood, the one that begs you not to make everything worse out of pride. Blythe arrived as if summoned, eyes bright with content she hadn't shot yet. I told her what happened. She lifted her chin. "Accidents happen," she said, her voice wearing innocence like borrowed jewelry. I showed her the footage. She didn't blink. "Then prove it," she said. "To who?" I asked. "To everyone." She meant her everyone, the one that lives in phones. I felt something cool settle in me, like a lake agreeing to be a mirror. "We already did," I said. "With Rosemary and kindness." She rolled her eyes and left, but not before looking at Joe with a cruelty I hadn't seen before. He looked smaller when the door shut. Joel came early the next day, hair damp, eyes steady. "I told her not to come back," he said. "She said you tanked the place and then blame her for trying to save it. I think she believes a story where she's both genius and victim." He slid his key onto the counter and then, after a beat, slid it back to his pocket. "I don't want to be that kind of person," he said. "Neither do I," I said. We poured 2 coffees and sat on milk crates in the kitchen like kids late to a birthday we were hosting. He laid out numbers, buyouts, loans, the kind of math that gives you wrinkles and hope. None of it worked without losing the door's blue. "What if we didn't buy out?" I said. "What if we bought in?" The idea arrived like breath after running. A community trust. Small shares. Voting rights that protected the ethos before profit. It sounded like work. It sounded like us. Joe listened like a person who had finally turned down the volume on his favorite noise. "People won't invest in a café," he said. "People will invest in themselves," I said. "And in Mara." We made a plan, a capped fund, transparent books, a rule that the more you put in money, the less you put in decisions. Tash rolled butcher paper across the table and drew a diagram that looked like a family tree and a flowchart had fallen in love. We printed pamphlets that used words like porch and light instead of APR. We launched on a Tuesday at 4, the hour when hope is either foolish or brave. The first contribution was $5 from a high schooler with ink on his fingers. The second was $100 from a paramedic who said, "You keep the long blacks coming, I'll keep arriving." The trust grew like something you tend quietly. $5 here, 50 there, 1,000 from an old friend of Mara's who'd moved north but still used the blue door as a way to measure the seasons. Mr. Verma came to sign the new lease addendum. He added 50 of his own, then embarrassed himself by clearing his throat too loudly. A woman I didn't know put in 20 and told me her mother used to measure love in cups of tea. "Make sure the spout doesn't drip," she said, which felt like a benediction. We held our first meeting on a Sunday at 5, the light through the window behaving itself. People asked sensible questions about contingencies and silly ones about whether the cafe could host a late-night knitting club. We said yes to both with the same seriousness. Joel proposed a budget that refused to pretend. I proposed a recipe rotation that invited neighbors to guest star in our kitchen. Someone asked if the door had to stay blue forever. "Yes," said a chorus of 20 voices before I could answer. I exhaled for a year I didn't know I'd been holding. At closing, the sky leaned into evening. Joel and I wiped counters in a rhythm that counted as a truce. He paused, put a hand on the espresso machine like it could read his pulse, and said, "I was embarrassed we didn't scale. Blythe liked big things. I like being liked." I thought of all the ways people try to be huge when being sturdy would do. Being small is a responsibility, I said. We just learned what it requires. He nodded, the shape of that learning settling in his shoulders. Then the lights flickered, shrugged, and died again. The storm wasn't done testing us. We lit lanterns like we meant it. Candle stubs in jam jars, their flickers making ordinary faces look like saints who'd gone grocery shopping. People stayed. They always stayed now. Someone started a slow clap that turned into nothing because clapping felt wrong for a room that was busy simply being. We brewed coffee on the camping stove again and passed cups hand to hand like a ceremony with no script. In the dark, the blue door glowed a deeper, calmer shade, the kind you find on old boats and trusted coats. Ava came back with a bag of rosemary and a thermos of hot water. If you steep it 5 minutes, the bitterness softens, she said, and we did, and it did. Tash read from Mara's letter to the room, the line about fighting fair, the line about blue being a promise. Joel stood beside me and didn't flinch when people touched his arm, didn't argue when a night shift nurse told him our long blacks had saved her patients more than once. Mr. Verma laughed in a way that made me think he'd sleep. When the power returned, the room didn't change. That felt important. People lingered like light after sunset. We swept quietly. We counted the till like a prayer. I locked the door and leaned my head against its paint, cool and loyal. Drama had been a storm, but it had also been a kind of clarity. We'd been measured and not found lacking. I slipped Mara's letter back into my apron and walked into a night that didn't scare me. Tomorrow would make its demands, loud and reasonable. But tonight, the café had chosen us back, and that was enough to carry me home. The morning after the lantern night, a local blogger dropped in unannounced, ordered a flat white, and stood quietly near the door as if listening for a heartbeat. She'd been the same voice that once amplified Blythe's clip. Today she posted a new piece titled, "The Blue Door Didn't Win, It Chose." I read it on my break, fingers leaving flower comets on my phone. She described a room where people were unafraid to be seen. She mentioned Joe, by name, handing a cup with both hands. She wrote that the door's blue worked like a promise you can point at. The comments, for once, were soft. By lunch, we were busy in the breathable way, not the frantic one. Tash taped a thank you note near the register. We read what you write. We still prefer what you say in here. A pensioner named Ringy brought in his harmonica, played 3 slow songs that sounded like rain deciding to be kind. A nurse I'd never met tucked a metal-sized sticker on the espresso grinder, "Keep going." It turned every grind into a small ceremony. Blythe tried a final volley in our direction, a video explaining how nostalgia cafes exploit grief for profit. Her edits were quick, her voice smug as a shiny boot. We didn't respond. We stocked the display, refilled water, wiped the milk wand until it shone like a good intention. People who might have argued online came in and placed their phones face down. They paid attention out loud. It rearranged the room. Near closing, Joel and I counted a till that had learned to breathe. He looked at the numbers the way a person studies a map of home they'd previously memorized wrong. "We can make rent and the plan," he said, surprised. I wanted to hug him and also tell him we were not out of the woods. Instead, I tapped the calendar where we'd penciled Verma meeting terms. Outside, the evening held itself politely. Inside, the espresso machine hissed in approval. We flipped chairs, mopped, and left the blue to gather the night like a shawl. In the quiet, a new worry was waiting, but it felt like one we could meet standing up. At the meeting, Verma brought a ledger that had lived more lives than mine. His fingers lingered on a page with Mara's exacting loops. "She paid what she could, when she could," he said, and then, almost shyly, slid out a photocopy of a letter she'd sent during the worst month. In it, she apologized for being late and included a recipe for the lemon slice. As interest. He'd kept it. "I made this for my grandkids last winter," he confessed, and I saw the soft place he hid under numbers. We proposed the trust-back lease with its cushions and clauses. He countered with a clause of his own. In the event of a future disaster, We'd meet within 5 days to redraw the plan, no lawyers first, just us. Joel nodded immediately. I signed, my hand steady as if the pen had borrowed resolve. After, Verma stayed for a tea and told Joel he reminded him of himself at 30, ambitious, smart, confusing velocity for direction. Joel didn't bristle. He listened and then asked if we could roll the rent increase in stages. Verma said yes, and in the yes I heard our odds lengthen in our favor. That afternoon, Tash found a tin behind a loose bit of skirting board, Mara hiding in plain sight. Inside, recipe cards written for the future, annotated like love letters to whoever might try next. If you overzest, compensate with a whisper of honey. One read, and I felt suddenly, irrationally, like we were being handed the rest of the map. The last card wasn't a recipe. It was a list of names with tiny notes. Ringy, Harmonica Mondays. Hemi, needs a quiet corner exam week. Verma, pretends he likes black tea, give him mint. Joel ran a thumb along the edge of those cards and exhaled in that slow way he only did when his guard slipped. I was scared, he said. The admission landed with the clean thud of truth. Me too, I said. But I think we're learning the difference between being scared of losing and scared of caring. He smiled, a practiced smile, then a real one. Okay, he said. Let's learn faster. In the doorway, the blue caught a piece of late sun and made a small ocean on the floor. I stepped through it like a crossing. The roaster shipped the wrong beans on a Thursday that already felt overfull. Instead of our familiar round caramel, we got afraid of something bright and chatty, citrus forward, all elbows. I wanted to send it back. We couldn't afford to. So we leaned in. We made a sign, guess beans this week, tell us the story you taste. People tried words I loved, grapefruit rain, gold-rimmed morning, the first day of trying something brave. A student suggested a tasting flight. We served 3 espresso shots like a trio of small arguments that somehow agreed. Mid-morning, a pipe burst in the upstairs dentist and water came through our ceiling in an apologetic veil. The dentist ran down with towels and a face on the edge of panic. We moved tables, covered the pastry case, built a quick-dry triage with fans that sounded like stubborn bees. Ava arrived with a stack of clean drop cloths from a set she was dressing. Emergency clouds, she said, draping the ceiling corner. We laughed, then didn't, then did again. Joel coordinated like a conductor, calm without trying to impress anyone. The room adjusted around the bit of weather it had been handed. In the commotion, I knocked my elbow against the skirting and felt a click. Another hiding place, a slim envelope tucked behind the wood. Inside, a tiny Polaroid of Mara and Verma, 20 years younger, standing on ladders painting the first coat of blue. On the back, in Mara's hand, if we can't pay, we'll paint. I tucked it into the tin with the recipe cards and understood that what we were doing wasn't new. It was a faithful adaptation. By afternoon, the fans and the guest beans had turned strangers into a team. The dentist brought us floss in bulk and offered discounted cleanings for anyone who'd spent the day breathing damp drywall. We comped coffees and wrote a note on the board, "Thank you for holding this room together with your hands and your patience." When the lights warmed and the drips slowed to polite, the rush tapered into something like gratitude with foam art. We closed later than we meant to, and it felt right. The ceiling would dry. The beans would change. The door stayed blue, and so did our nerve. The health inspector returned, clipboard ready to test our memory for failure. He found the tile repaired, thermometers recalibrated, logs neat as a librarian's dream. He tried to look bored by our competence. He failed. "You run a tight ship," he said, a smile making a rare guest appearance. He signed us off with a flourish that felt celebratory. I copied the pass into a smaller sign that said, "We tidy because you come back." People noticed. It made them straighten a chair as they left. With official eyes satisfied, unofficial ones arrived. A council arts coordinator asked if the skaters would be interested in painting a sanctioned mural on the alley wall. Hemi nearly levitated. We negotiated neighbors' concerns about noise and mess, and a retired painter named June volunteered to supervise with the gravity of a kindly planet. Joel drafted a timeline. Tash wrangled permission forms that multiplied like sparrows. On Saturday, color bloomed across the brick, a giant blue door opening into stylized cups and constellations. Even Verma cried a little, hiding behind sunglasses on an overcast day. Of course, not everyone loved it. A letter slid under the door from a neighbor who wanted the alley to look like an alley and not an invitation. We invited him to coffee. He arrived with a scowl and left with a schedule for mural quiet hours that made more sense than ours. He also left with a loyalty card and later, a note, "Didn't plan to like you." Oops. We added quiet felt pads under chairs, put up acoustic panels that looked like art, and turned the music down one click after 9. Learning to live with each other turned out to be as granular as waking early to buffer an edge. On the board, someone wrote, "Compromise is just a longer table." I drew an extra leaf on our little drawn cafe table and felt, briefly, like an operational adult. Then the phone rang with a number I didn't know and news I didn't want to hold alone. A reporter from the evening news wanted to do a segment. "Local cafe chooses community over clout." I said yes before I had time to be strategic. Blythe posted a story the same hour. "Remember that cafe that attacked me? They're spinning their narrative again." I turned my phone face down and wiped the counter like it could absorb an anxiety I didn't have space to store. Joel suggested we treat the news piece like we treat a busy morning. Prep, breathe, remember names. The camera crew arrived with soft-soled shoes and real curiosity. They filmed the mural, the lanterns, a latte poured slowly enough to watch a leaf appear. They interviewed Varma, who, to my astonishment, said on television, "Some debts are numbers, some are care. We keep both ledgers." Tash handled the hard questions about money like she'd been practicing them in an alley with chalk. Joel spoke one clear sentence about growth we could stand inside. I said the thing Mara had taught me. "We keep the door blue so people know where the porch is." The piece aired at 6. The footage made our room look warmer than it already was. Orders doubled, then settled into a new level that still let us recognize faces. The rent cushion grew. A retired carpenter offered to repair our wobbly table for a pie. I paid him in 2. The comments online were not all kind, but they were quieter than they used to be, as if people had remembered they were people. That night, after close, I swept slowly just to stay in the room longer. Joel leaned on the counter, the way Mara used to when she was deciding whether to stay and chat or send me home to sleep. "Pop up at the station?" he said, cautious. 2 mornings a week. Portable menu. We catch commuters who never walk this way." My first instinct was to protect the door. Then I heard the gentler idea inside the pitch, not expansion for ego, but outreach to invite. "1 cart," I said. "Blue. No compromises on the beans, even the chatty ones." He grinned, and the room made space for the future without moving. We launched the station cart on a Tuesday with the sky the color of clean plates. Hemi painted a miniature blue door on its side, and June sealed it with weatherproof patience. Commuters at first did the glance and pass of people late to their own mornings. Joel worked the lever. I worked the hello. By day 3, we had regulars who held out their keep cups like a handshake and learned to say the names of our staff even before learning our specials. We stapled tiny cards to receipts. Visit the porch. People came. The new rhythm worked, until an email from a development company landed like an ungentle knock. Subject, acquisition inquiry. They were in talks to purchase our block. They wanted to honor legacy uses where feasible, which is developer for goodbye unless you can prove you're a chess piece worth keeping. The message included a link to glossy renderings of apartments with balconies that looked like they'd filter rain for sport. A meeting was requested. The date sat on the calendar like a glass we were trying not to knock over. We did what we'd learned to do, gathered. Burma looked stricken and stubborn. Tash started a folder labeled Building, Fate and Forms. Joel printed the city's heritage guidelines. June produced a scrapbook of the alley before the mural, monochrome dreariness transformed now into color. We drafted a case for cultural significance, not the grand marble kind, the hands and mornings kind. Letters poured in. The paramedic wrote about long blacks at 3 a.m. The neighbor who hated murals wrote, "Turns out the alley never needed to be gray." Ava sent a photo of a biscuit on a script page, crumbs like stars. On the day of the meeting, the developer's rep arrived in a suit that resisted the concept of crumbs. We set water on the table, not coffee. My little rebellion, my little reminder that thirst isn't always for caffeine. He spoke about market realities. We spoke about lived ones. He nodded at our trust structure and said words like admirable and complex. I slid him Mara's Polaroid of the first blue paint and said, "This isn't just a cafe. It's how this street remembers itself." He didn't scoff. He also didn't promise anything. He said he'd take it back to the team. When he left, the room felt like the moment after you ring a bell and wait to hear if anybody's coming. We stood in it, together, listening for the next sound. Waiting became its own job. I cleaned the grinder burrs with a toothbrush, restocked lids by feel, and counted scenarios like coins. Yes, no, maybe, not yet. Tash drew a plan on butcher paper titled Long Table Day. 130-meter table down the alley, bowls of soup, stacks of bread, stories served like second helpings. "If a place can be eaten together, it can be defended," she said. June shook out checkered cloths that smelled faintly of lavender and paint. Hemi gathered skaters and grandmothers to string lights from window to window, a constellation made of extension cords and optimism. We filed our heritage application under place of social significance, a phrase that sounded both grand and exact. The form wanted evidence, years of use, intergenerational memories, civic contribution. I emptied the tin again, recipe cards, Polaroid, notes in Mara's hand, and felt like I was taking attendance. Joel assembled a clean packet, before and after sales, trust structure, rent cushion, midnight-long black program. He watched me tape the Polaroid into a page protector like we were sealing a pact. Blythe posted a reel in front of a different cafe. "New vibe, new tribe," and tossed a line about sentimentality holding cities back. The blogger from last week answered with a column about how the blue door wasn't nostalgia. It was curriculum. Ava sent a message I read 3 times, proud of the way you've stopped arguing and started inviting. I didn't realize until then how much lighter inviting feels. Long Table Day tasted like rain held off by promises. Neighbors brought lentils and lamb, rosemary and rice, stories and silence they were willing to fill. Varma ladled with the ferocity of a man who'd done math and found room. Joel moved down the table pouring water as if hydration itself were an argument. At dusk, we asked each person to write 1 sentence on a card, why the blue matters. Pockets of handwriting became a small weather system. Because my son learned to say please here, because it smells like my father's cardigan, because the alley isn't afraid of itself anymore. We packed the cards like kindling for whatever the meeting would require. When the last bowl stacked, a courier arrived with a brown box and no return address. On the label, for the porch. Inside the box, a guest book from the first year, marbled paper gone soft at the corners, 3 cassette tapes labeled Opening Week, Radio Interviews. A flour-dusted apron with blues stitched crookedly in sky thread. Tucked in the pocket, a note from Lottie, Mara's oldest friend. She asked me to keep these until the room needed evidence of its own heartbeat. I pressed my nose to the apron and smelled lemon, heat, and that tiny electric scent of sugar just before it goes golden. Joel rewound my memory with a pencil and smiled. "We digitized tonight," he said, already clearing a corner for the old tape deck June produced from nowhere. Council visited the next morning. Sarah, sensible boots, sensible questions, ran a hand over the blue door like you touch a horse you're thinking of trusting. We made coffee for the team and set the guest book open to a page where a child had drawn the door as tall as a sky. Hemi walked them to the mural, naming the teenagers who painted each star as if reciting a roster. Ringy played 1 harmonica line and then tucked the instrument away like a secret he'd only lend once. Sarah listened to the tapes through a small speaker, eyes closing at Mara's laugh. She nodded at our application and said the words we'd prepared to hear. "This is promising. We'll need more than a good story." Then she reached into her satchel and produced a form I hadn't known existed. provisional protection pending determination. If we can show continuity, she said, tapping the line, we can shield you while we deliberate. Continuity meant decades that behaved themselves. We didn't have decades. We had days braided very tightly. By afternoon, word spread, bring your old receipts, your faded photos, your memories with names. People arrived with shoeboxes and cracked frames, with bus tickets and birthday badges. The alley table returned, this time covered in documents that smelled like cupboards. Ava catalogued photos. Tash interviewed elders with the patience of a tide. Joel scanned until the machine grew warm and proud. At twilight, Sarah returned to see the pile become an archive. She looked at the heap, then at us, and said, sometimes continuity is just a town deciding not to forget. She signed the provisional form with a pen that clicked like a latch. We exhaled into the new kind of waiting that follows a small yes. The developer called the next morning with a compromise that tasted like boiled vegetables, a designated community use level. On the ground floor, nicer words for a food court, with a rent number that ignored how light moves and names accumulate. You'd be our anchor tenant, he said, like we wanted an anchor. I looked at the drawing. Glass everywhere, blue nowhere, tables that could belong to anyone. Joel muted the line and rubbed his eyes with 2 fingers. Poison pill, he said. Looks like a gift from far away. We stalled. We're exploring our options, I said, which was true and insufficient. After the call, Joel stared at the mural as if it might give him a number to call that wasn't his own worry. I need to say something, he said finally. He wrote a letter to the trust, to customers, to himself, what I learned from being wrong. He listed his decisions like inventory, courting clout, confusing audience with community, believing in the speed of attention over the density of care. He didn't excuse, he accounted. He taped it to the board at eye level and then went to mop the back, swallowing whatever it means to be human and proud at once. Lottie arrived with a plastic container of ginger slice and a VHS labeled Blue Door, First Coat. June cackled and wheeled out an ancient TV that groaned but obeyed. The grainy footage filled the room with younger versions of Verma and Mara painting, arguing about whether the color read sky or ocean. Verma watched standing, hands in pockets, a boy caught in his own prologue. We were so sure and so broke, he said. We recorded the recording, a continuity loop we could send to council. In the afternoon rush, a man I didn't recognize asked for a black and then stood at the board reading Joel's letter all the way to the last period. He folded a note into the donations jar. I'm one of the new building's investors. I prefer returns. Today I prefer this. He left without a name. The jar thudded heavier than paper. I didn't open it. I poured another long black and kept the line moving. That night, the station cart played the VHS clips on a tablet propped with a cookbook. Commuters paused, earbuds out, and watched 2 people paint a door the color of a promise none of us had known we'd need. The next morning, Sarah emailed one line. Bring the tape to the hearing. I wrote back. We'll bring the room. The hearing felt like a school assembly for adults with complicated agendas. The room's carpet believed in neutrality. The clock did not. We sat in our row with folders and breathed mints, and the Polaroid. Sarah presented first, social significance, intergenerational use, evidence of community-led stewardship. She played 30 seconds of the VHS, Mara laughing when blue dripped on her boot, and the room made that small involuntary sound people make when sincerity surprises them. Then came public comment. We had stacked ours like plates. Rindy went first, voice steady, harmonica silent in his pocket. I lost my wife and found mornings again here, he said simply, and the sentence sat in the air with its own chair. The neighbor who'd hated the mural read from a page he'd folded and refolded until it behaved. His argument for quiet hours sounded like a manual for living beside each other. A paramedic in uniform, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and rain, talked about caffeine and kindness between 2 and 4 a.m., how both can interrupt a spiral. Ava read a letter from an actress on location who watched the tapes between takes and cried on a plastic chair. And Blythe, of course, signed up to speak. She wore a blazer like a verdict and said gentrification with a practiced ache. She argued that heritage status can freeze a street in amber, that vibe preservation prevents equity. She was not entirely wrong, she was less than generous. Joel stood to reply and surprised me by agreeing with her first point. We don't want amber, he said. We want the living blue. We're not asking you to fix a memory in place. We're asking for permission to keep doing the work that makes new ones. The room shifted a degree, toward us, or maybe just toward its own better self. The chair thanked everyone and used the word, deliberate, in the way that means Tuesday 2 weeks from now. Provisional protection would hold. The Developers Council asked for a site walkthrough. Sarah agreed. We nodded because nodding is the currency of meetings. Outside, the afternoon had that washed look cities get after arguments that stayed civil. Tash squeezed my shoulder. We did not embarrass our dead, she whispered, which is as close to winning as some days get. Back at the cafe, we put out a tray of rosemary shortbread and served until the sun decided to go home. When we flipped the sign to closed, the blue looked less like paint and more like decision. Tomorrow's hook hung gently in the room. If not amber, then how? How arrived as sawdust. June rallied a half-dozen retired troglodytes who treated our tiny back room like a puzzle worth their hands. You want living heritage? She said, thumping a stud. Give it new bones. They built a simple mezzanine, 2 steps up to a small platform with a rail and a window we hadn't known wanted to exist. Tash scheduled free evening classes, knitting, ESL, budgeting, essay help, 1 night each, nothing heroic, everything steady. The mezzanine became a porch inside the porch, a place to practice staying. Verma brought by a folder we hadn't asked for, a partial stake in the building he'd kept quiet because grief had made him cautious. I can't stop a sale, he said, but I can insist on tenant protections for legacy operators. He drafted a clause, right of return, granting us a long lease in any redevelopment, at a rent pegged to a sane index. He could swing 1 seat on the owner board. He was offering it to the clause. This will make me unpopular at dinner, he said. I'd like that. Joel shook his hand with both of his, a new habit I hoped he never lost. That afternoon, a man tried our door and stumbled. He caught himself on the frame and laughed, embarrassed. Sorry, he said. Been dizzy lately. 30 minutes later he slumped in a chair, gray around the mouth. Ava, arriving for class, saw it first. Cold sweats, arm tingling, she said, voice low but crisp. The paramedic student in the corner was on the phone before my fear could organize. We cleared a space. Rengi counted breaths. The ambulance took 5 minutes, which felt like a year and a half. They wheeled him out, still joking weakly, and later his daughter came back to pay for a biscuit nobody remembered ringing up. She wrote on the board, Your porch caught my father. I wiped my eyes with a clean towel and decided fresh tea was the only possible response. That night, under the new mezzanine, I found myself shaking, not from the scare, but from the ache of almost losing a stranger who had become ours by falling into the room. Joel handed me a ginger slice and did not make a speech. Right of return, he said softly, as if the clause had already expanded to include people. We locked up together and walked past the mural, stars bright where paint meets brick. The station cart waited under a tarp like a faithful dog. The hearing was still a week away. Waiting felt less like standing still and more like something with a pulse. The developers team toured the site with their crucial shoes and curated nods. They stood in the alley staring up at teens on ladders, Hemi and friends touching up the constellation, and one of them asked an honest question. What do you do when the kids leave? June answered without looking down. Make new kids, she said. Inside, we showed them the mezzanine classes in session, the ESL tutor trading muffins for pronunciation, the budgeting group laughing at the absurdity that money has moods. Sarah watched quietly, taking notes like someone who trusts evidence when it's breathing. We ended at the blue door. Joel explained right of return with the confidence of a man who had spent the week reading laws instead of sleeping. Verma backed him with the weight of an owner and a grandfather. The lead developer ran a hand over the rail as if testing for splinters of responsibility. We can draft an anchor legacy clause, he said slowly. 15 years, fair escalators, mural protected, alley access maintained. It sounded like a person trying not to make a promise they didn't intend to keep and accidentally making one anyway. We didn't clap. We poured water. We asked for the clause in writing. We asked for the clause to travel with the property, not the company's mood. We asked for a community oversight seat with no power over profit and complete power over the porch. They blinked at that last bit, then shrugged in unison, the body language of people who'll trade what they think is nothing for whatever they want. Sarah smiled into her notebook. That evening, the blogger published a piece titled, "A Door That Refused to Be an Aesthetic." The comments turned into recipe swaps and bus timetables. Blythe posted a pout, and then a pivot to a new wellness brand. Her audience applauded gracefully somewhere else. We closed late, tired deep in the ankles. Tash drew a calendar on the back wall, hearing, "Tues, draft clause FRI. Long table, son thank you." I practiced saying, 15-year lease, out loud and didn't break. At the station the next morning, a man ordered a flat white and said, "I moved here last week. People told me to find your blue. Found it." He left with a keep cup and a loyalty card and a neighborhood. I watched him go and thought, maybe this is what drama is for, to find the shape of what you'll protect without becoming hard yourself. The draft clause arrived on Friday at 9:12 a.m., smelling faintly of printer heat and someone else's decisions. Joel read it twice, lips moving, then laid it flat like a patient on the counter. Anchor legacy tenant, 15-year term, mural protection, alley access. Subject to operational safety. The key sentence, the heart we'd asked for, said the clause would. Run with the land. I touched the words like checking a pulse. The oversight seat was there too, but as advisory. Sarah lifted an eyebrow that meant push. We did. In the back room, June drew a line through. Subject to operational safety. Replacing it with, in consultation with community safety plan. So nobody could use a hazard sign as a lever. Tash added language tying rent escalations to actual inflation, not the mood of a market graph. Joel called Varma, then the developer. We spoke calmly, like people who know the difference between a concession and a leak. The developer's rep sighed so deeply I could hear his tie droop. "You people negotiate like aunties," he said. "That's a compliment," I replied, and it was. At noon we closed for an hour, the first time since Mara's funeral, so we could read the clause aloud to whoever wanted to listen. People in paint-spattered shirts and office shoes stood shoulder to shoulder under the mezzanine, coffee cooling untouched. I read the new words. Joel explained the math. Sarah clarified what the council could and couldn't hold. When we reached the oversight seat, Rindy raised a hand and suggested the chair rotate quarterly. So no one becomes a plaque. He was right. We added rotation to the margin, sent the changes back, and waited while the clause did its slow swim through legal currents. By late afternoon, an email. Accepted with edits in blue we could live with. The clause would travel with the property, no matter who signed the next check. The mural and alley would be protected beyond the mood of a boardroom. The oversight seat would rotate, named publicly each quarter. I exhaled a year. Joel leaned against the espresso machine and laughed with his whole chest for the first time since Mara died. I flipped the sign to open again and pulled a flat white so steady the milk looked like light, remembering how to land. The hearing was still ahead. But for the first time, the future felt like a table already set. Tuesday's hearing arrived with that classroom hush that makes even grown-ups sit up straighter. Sarah presented the updated clause as a companion to our case, not a shield of amber, but a hinge. She spoke about place as a verb and the way a blue door had become grammar for gathering. The panel asked sensible questions about parking, fire egress, precedent. Then the chair cleared his throat and read the resolution with the careful cadence of someone who knows sentences can move walls. The blue door, alley and mural included, designated a place of social significance, living heritage, protected in situ with allowances for continued use and adaptation. Applause isn't standard in these rooms, but it happened anyway, small as rain on tin. The developers' council didn't clap. He nodded like a man who'd lost a good argument and gained a workable city. Outside, the blogger filmed the quick piece where she said, "Not frozen. Carried forward." Ava squeezed my arm. Joel stared up at the sky like he'd just learned to read its handwriting. Sarah took a photo of the blue and texted a single word to the officer who'd helped draft the form. Done. Back at the cafe, we wrote the news on the chalkboard, then erased it, then wrote it again bigger because the first version didn't seem to hold enough oxygen. Verma came in and, without a speech, changed our rent slip to "paid through next Friday," because he could. Hemi sketched a tiny laurel around one star on the mural, and then wiped it off, embarrassed by the idea of medals. Ringy played the first bar of a song and stopped, which somehow said more. We closed early and hauled out paint trays. The door had weathered the winter and the hands and the arguments. It needed a second coat. June taped edges. Tash cued the old VHS on a tablet propped with a bag of beans. Joel and I stood where Mara and Verma had stood, brushes wet with the exactly wrong shade until the moment it dried into exactly right. People gathered in the alley, watching the blue become itself again. When the last stroke feathered into the join, we stepped back, flecked and grinning. The room behind us smelled like citrus, coffee, and something I hadn't felt since childhood, an ending that also felt like a start. We shut for 4 days, our bravest act, to mend the bones staying would require. The electrician threaded new wire like nerves. A plumber coaxed ancient pipes into modern sentences. The mezzanine gained a book rail, polished smooth by June's patience. We rolled rugs that wouldn't trip night shift boots, hung acoustic panels disguised as painted constellations, and sanded the wobbly table until its wobble became a story instead of a hazard. During the closure, the station cart became the porch on wheels. Hemi brewed. Joel smiled at commuters like he'd been waiting to meet them. I learned which platform collects the gentlest people at 7:10. On the third night, I dreamed of Mara setting cups upside down along the counter, each one catching a different piece of the city's weather. I woke before dawn and went in early, alone, to set the first chairs. The quiet had a weight I liked lifting. I unfolded the tin, recipe cards, Polaroid, the guestbook page with the sky-tall child door, and tucked them, finally, into a shadow box Joel had built. We hung it near the register where people's eyes naturally rest while I steam milk. It looked less like memorial and more like instruction. When we reopened, the first pour felt ceremonial. We started with long blacks for the night crews who had been our drumbeat. The paramedic grinned around a yawn. The museum guard brought postcards of the harbor painting. The neighbor who wrote the first complaint set down a plate of cheese scones his wife insisted we try. Blythe didn't come. The absence felt neither vindictive nor sad, which was its own piece. In the afternoon, Sarah appeared in jeans and a jumper instead of a council jacket, and bought a loaf of Mara's lemon slice for her office, which made me tear up for no administrative reason. That night, with the doors locked and the dishwater cooling, Joel and I split the last rosemary shortbread, crumbs bright as salt. "We didn't win," he said, as if correcting something I hadn't said aloud. "We learned how to stay." I nodded, thinking of the claws that traveled with the land and the people who traveled with each other. The room settled around us the way rooms do when they trust their own corners again. Tomorrow we'd be just a cafe. That was the victory. The thank you long table felt different with the hearing behind us and the claws in our pocket. Less like pleading a case, more like signing a treaty. We ran the table the length of the alley again, this time with placemats printed from the "Why the Blue Matters" cards. People found their sentences and sat in front of them like place cards for the heart. The menu was simple: soup, bread, a salad that admitted winter but invited spring, lemon slice with the right amount of zest, and a bowl of honey for the timid. Speeches tried to happen and then dissolved into toasts. Varmar raised his water and said, "To rent paid on time, and to the kind of late that's worth understanding." June toasted splinters that didn't win. Tash toasted forms that learned to love the people they describe. Joel's toast was a single line: "I am grateful for the ways I was wrong." He didn't sit down right away. A few people stood to touch his shoulder, a congregation without liturgy. Midway through, the developer's rep arrived without a camera, hands empty, eyes cautious. He accepted a bowl, listened more than he spoke, and when he left, he slid a letter under the shadow box. Anchor Legacy Clause, signed. The paper was heavy and unshowy. I put it in the tin, then laughed at myself, then slid it back out and pinned it to the board because some proofs are for sharing. Ringy played a hymn that had forgotten it was a hymn. Hemi skated a slow, respectful circle, wheels whispering approval against the new paint. At dusk, we lit lanterns again though we didn't need them. The alley glowed like a living room that had outgrown its walls without losing its manners. Ava leaned at the edge of the table, watching everyone watch everyone else. "You made the city choose gentler verbs," she said. "Stay, carry, learn, mend." I thought of how drama had dragged us into louder words, fight, prove, win, and felt the relief of not needing them anymore. We scrubbed bowls, stacked chairs, rolled tablecloths that smelled of rosemary and ink. When the last lantern went out, the blue door was the brightest thing on the block, doing nothing more aggressive than being itself. On the first slow morning after the long table, I arrived before light and stood alone in the doorway, the key warm from my pocket. Inside, the fridges purred, the grinder waited, the new wiring held its breath like a stagehand who knows the cues. I made myself a coffee. I didn't have to rush and walked the room, the mezzanine with its book rail, the shadow box with recipes and the Polaroid of paint, the chalkboard with a single sentence Tash had left after clean up. "We keep the door blue so we remember to open." It felt less like a motto and more like choreography. Joel came in with the newspaper under his arm and 2 boxes of lids. He set them down and looked around as if checking on a sleeping child. "Feels different," he said. "Feels earned," I answered. We worked in a quiet that didn't need to be filled. Verma popped his head in only to wave. Henny chalked a date in the corner of the mural for future touch-ups. Ringy left a postcard of the sea with 3 words on the back: "See you Monday." Before we opened, I took Mara's letter from the tin one last time. The fold had softened where my thumb always landed on Fight Fair. I read the last line again, aloud to the empty room. "Keep the door blue. People come when they know what color welcome is." I slid the letter into the shadow box and closed it, not to hide it, but to let it belong to the room instead of just me. Outside, the street yawned and straightened its cuffs. I flipped the sign to open. The first customer was a stranger with a keep cup and a map folded wrong. "I just moved here," he said. "Someone told me to find the blue door if I wanted to know how mornings work." I smiled, wrote his name on the lid, and handed him a long black with both hands, the way we do now. He took a sip, looked around, and relaxed by a centimeter. The grinder sang. Joel laughed at something in the paper. Somewhere in the alley, a skate will tick the rhythm of a place that remembers itself in motion. I wiped the counter once, slowly, and felt the room settle like a boat tied to a good cleat. We hadn't ended anything so much as brought it to where it could keep living without panic. The developer would draw their glass and steel. The clause would hold. Council would send forms. The station cart would steam on cold mornings. The mezzanine would fill with small classes that teach survival. People would come, the way water finds its level and light finds wood. I pressed my palm to the blue. It was cool, patient, exactly itself. Drama had sharpened us. Community had kept us soft. The day stepped in, and we made room.